topical subject matters. We're very pleased today to have Tony Small, John Cotton, Sean Thomas, who represent two different companies, Ice House Oysters and Devil's Apron. It's a combination of, I think, John, you're the pivotal person.
He is, he's the center swivel spot.
Yeah, Tony and I do Ice House Oysters, and Sean and I do Devil's Apron Sea Farm.
Yeah. And so here at Coastal Science Center is our mission is to educate students and community people regarding the interconnections between the ocean, inland waters, and communities about the economies of Maine and the education regarding marine environments and freshwater environments. And so we're really excited that for nearly 23 years we were known as Herndon Learning Center. But last year we changed our name, broadened our outreach a little bit, so we're up and down the mid-coast now and inland, even as far as Greenville with our Fresh to Salt project. So we're definitely moving in a different and still foundation. Hey, come on in. There's a seat right in front. No. Our outreach is reaching new audiences across the state of Maine. I'm very pleased to have you all here today. I'm going to turn it over to you all. Thank you so much for coming in. I know you're here just for a little while. But Carrie Ann, you can be their IT person?
Yeah.
Do you want to start with the film? Should we give them the lights?
Tom, you put the lights. Should there be sound? There should be the remote. You're good where you are.
I should run to the water. I would be looking for minnows. I call everything with minnows. I've always been chasing fish. I fished for groundfish, pollock, haddock, cod, all the flatfish, monkfish, lobster, offshore in the winter. Tuna fishing is still one of my great loves. I was born like this, and there's nothing I can do about it.
When I met John the first time, energetically, I was like, whoa.
I got a new door I made. A lot of film on my back. Do I come out here? Now you stand.
John is very passionate and energetic. When he dives into something, it's like he's just gone in. He has a dynamic that I find electric and exhausting at times. I was really drawn to him and his love of the water. We're both inspired by this place. When I began photographing the fishermen of Port Clyde, I felt like it was important to document such rapid change in the fishery.
There used to be so many options for us. Shrimping, that's closed. Ground fishing has collapsed. It's very, very hard to make a living. And now the water's warming, and we don't know what's going to happen with the lobster fishery. It is very hard to manage. You never know what's coming down the pike. Whether it's climate change, new regulations, the market's changing, it's the nature of the business. You have got to adapt. These are small oyster bags for baby oysters. This is all the stuff you build lobster traps with, which I probably built about 10,000 or more traps in my life. I use a lot of that same stuff just because I already have it. When I was about 25, when we were lobstering, we'd see a couple of aquaculture guys around. We laughed, these guys are never gonna make it. was for the guy who couldn't go lobstering, or was lobstering but didn't do well. But after fishing for almost 40 years offshore, I could see the benefits.
Definitely when I was younger, I remember that he would be gone for like a long time.
Look right up.
So it's nice to have him around.
Those are nice oysters, aren't they?
Yeah.
Beauties.
He's so into oysters. It's really fun to see how interested he is.
You have to re-tag them all? That's probably 20,000, maybe more.
Everything kind of evolves and you have to evolve with it. But it's definitely important to keep something of the original.
So beautiful out.
I think my dad does that really well.
We've been experimenting with bottom mill, floating bags, some intertidal ones that float up and down the tide. And it looked at a lot like microbrews. We had to find a way to stand apart.
Oh, that's a beauty. Look at that one.
Wow.
That is nice, not yet.
Right.
It's taken us years to get to this point. We wanted to go slowly to learn about our site and the oysters and the flavor.
And that did end up making a difference. They're much more briny than most oysters, and they have a really clean finish.
It's been really fun to watch John finding another passion on the water. And I love that we get to do this as a family.
Yeah, that's weird. Well, I'm very happy with where we ended up. If you open and change, good things can happen to you. I'm living it right now.
So that was a film done by Good Fight Media. In 2020, they approached us as part of, there's 2 other films on this website called Maine Coast Harvest. And they were basically trying to like get the word out about what is it to make this shift to aquaculture, what are the little, like, who's doing what up and down the coast. So that was made in 2020, and already, like, there's a little bit of change to how our farm is put together. We've moved, we're actually pretty excited. Last year we got things lined up where we got permission to move the bulk of our oysters. We have about 300,000 oysters in various stages of growth, from tiny to ready, almost ready for market size. So we moved the primary grow site to a retired lobster pound on Horse Point Road. So we could bore you for hours on the process of getting permission to participate in aquaculture. It's pretty laborious, and there's a bit of a backlog at this point. So it just finally lined up that we were able to move the babies, because what we were experiencing, we're talking about using that site, but the truth is climate change is also affecting wave pattern, wind pattern, and so we have started to experience, Jeff, another grower, and we were talking just before everybody came in, but there's new wave action. So you might put all your oysters down on the bottom for the winter and then discover there's like a whole bunch of wave action from the west, and you've got a silt problem come spring when you haul them up. So it's not for the faint of heart trying to figure out how to grow these crops, and they take anywhere from, well, we're experimenting now. The lobster pounds should be a much shorter grow period.
It's a lot warmer.
It's a lot warmer, and they're protected, and so we're hoping for an 18-month to 3-year grow pattern rather than a 3-year to 5-year grow pattern. Because that just means you're extending the numbers of months you have to keep that thing alive before you get it to market. So I just wanted to say that, because I realize it sounded like, oh yeah, that site worked great, and in truth, there's a lot of adaptation that comes even after you start the process.
Yeah, farming, we found, is not at all like fishing. Makes you feel really dumb. It's much harder.
It is hard.
We thought it would be easier. Well, at least when we're home.
Yeah.
not far away, sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Do people have particular questions? Because there's a lot we could say about oysters, maybe, but maybe you're here today with like a particular question, or Anne,
You start with a seed, do you not?
you do.
And where has that come from?
So the seed, so an oyster seed or an oyster spat, actually thank you, that reminds me, years ago when there was a hatchery here at Herringut, I got to go down in the spring and walked into the room where the boys were, it was mostly boys, I don't think there were any girls in that particular class at the time, but they were spawning, and so you had like a table like this, and they had fish trays with the, so the brood stock, so you have an oyster who's proven herself and himself to be reproductively viable. And the boys were all there with their baseball caps on backwards. It was just a great scene from hearing that. Their caps were on backwards, and I walked in the door, and it was quiet, all the lights were out. It was really warm, and this was like March or February. And I came in the door, they were like, shh. Okay. It turns out oysters like it quiet when they're spawning. So what happens is you have your broodstock, and you have like a tray of 70-degree water, which prompts the oyster to release sperm and to release their eggs. And so they would set them up. I remember they were really well organized. It was like a dozen oysters, and there'd be one that would sort of shoot out eggs, and then the male would shoot out sperm, and everybody would get all excited very quietly. And so then all of a sudden you have like the egg and the sperm meeting in the water column, and then it would get moved into a huge vat of water, and then they would do the sampling. I didn't really get to do that, but you sample to figure out how many parts per million of fertilized spat or seed you had in the water. And
We
then
don't do this.
we don't do this
You
part,
buy
because
it.
this is like, you can imagine. It's a whole nother level. So we buy our seed from a woman named Tony Simmons, who runs Muscogis Bay Aquaculture in Bremen. And so.
I'm sorry, where?
In Bremen, yeah, so every
We
year,
have to put in an order.
we put in an order, and we go and collect them, usually end of June, beginning of
January, we
July.
have to do an order. And then,
Yep.
Then
Yep.
you can order them in different sizes
So
too.
he has some pond or something up warm.
So they have an inside building, it's an
Huge
inside
tank, yeah.
hatchery, and all the water is treated, comes in from, whatever that body of water is
Muscogis
right there,
Bay.
Muscogis Bay, yeah, and then it's treated, and then they do grow outs. So you can buy them almost microscopically, and some farms will get them very, very small and then put them in an upweller, which requires like electricity, and it keeps them circulating, and they grow in that water. We get them, we're now at 6 to 8 millimeters. You can get them up to 9 to
Yes.
13.
Cheaper, the smaller they are, the cheaper they are.
Cheaper they are, the smaller they are, because they're getting them through more of the life cycle. But then we're not having to do the care and feeding of microscopic organisms, basically. So by the time we get them, they're like the size of my pinky fingernail, or maybe my thumb, maybe.
And then proceed. What?
And then they go into the bags. So you saw the rigid plastic bags. So they go from, last year we had 150,000. So we divided them into 150 bags. They each had roughly 1,000 per bag. And then they spend the summer. And there's just like, you don't do that much except check on them and turn them over so that they don't grow in clumps,
Yeah,
right?
so they grow in
Oysters
deep
net,
cup.
yeah. And they don't
If
grow
you don't
deep
move them,
cup.
they'll grow like a potato chip.
Yeah,
So you constantly, and that's one of the benefits about growing them out in deep cove is it's the wave.
lots
action.
of movement.
They get a wicked deep cut, but we also lose a lot because there's so much wind and waves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It destroys a lot of it. So that's why we're also so happy with lobster, not only because of the temperature, but because they're safe.
Yeah.
And then we do is we finish them off.
Mhm.
When they're market size, we put them out for a month or so out in the colder water, and again.
They get cleaned up and nice flavor, and they do take on the attributes of the water they're grown in. So that's why you have the same kind of oyster up and down the East Coast growing, but they're just grown in different conditions. So
Yeah,
you
they
get
all
somebody,
taste so different.
you get somebody growing near a marsh, you're gonna taste the grass kind of overtones, somebody up a river,
Some of them taste like
floral,
flowers.
some of them
yeah.
taste floral.
Yeah.
Ours taste like flowers in the spring more often than not. There's like a sweet finish. So they take on characteristics, and then seasonally they have different characteristics.
Yeah, like this year happened to us the first time ever. I opened one before I sold it, and I opened it and it looked like someone had dropped a drop of blood in it, and it just turned this pink color. I was like, oh no, was it some horrible disease? No, it was an algae that had been eating. So, and I read further that I think it was Thomas Jefferson or George Washington, he used to seek these kind of oysters out because they were sought after,
Yeah,
rare,
yeah. Yeah, it was an algae that, I
Yeah.
mean, we called a bunch of people, we're like, help, what do we do? You know, they're like, I think it's algae. And then we found it was like a bright orange algae that's particularly stirred up, because those were finishing on the intertidal site where they're getting sort of washed and they're in and out of the water, so they're attached to a wedge that we put anchored on the beach, and then they go up and down with the tide. And there was this algae was sort of all dried over the cage, and we realized that there was just a symbiotic relationship between the algae and the oyster. Yeah, and you have to be cautious after a big rain event. You know, we can have closures where they just like shut the whole coast down.
What is it, how much rain?
2 inches
2 inches
in 24 hours. Yeah,
And
Yeah.
the whole state will get shut down, or wherever you got the 2 inches of rain.
yeah.
But it's great, Maine is really good at regulating it, because raw shellfish can be deadly if it's not handled right, so.
Yeah.
That's one, Maine really does a great job of that.
They do. Anybody else?
I have a
Yeah.
question. And so when it shuts down after a significant rain event, does that just mean you can't harvest those days and then they just have to be out for a longer period of time before you pull them out?
So we can't harvest. Well, what you could do is if you knew a rain event was coming,
Right,
you
pull
can
them.
harvest and
Yeah,
pull
put 'em-
them.
yeah.
Yep, and put them on ice.
That's what everybody does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's mostly what people do. And then there's some, like Mook Sea Farm, right,
Oh, yeah, he's got a closed system.
he's working on a closed system,
Right.
so he can have oysters within.
Oh, he has it.
He has it
He has
already.
it no matter what the closure.
I haven't
Because
seen
if
it.
you're selling 5 million oysters a year, you can't afford to be closed.
Right.
Right, yeah.
That's
Gotcha.
not
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
And I think we've been probably luckier because we're closer to the coast. A lot of folks up rivers
Yeah, we
and
rarely
in
get
coves, they have a little bit, probably have a few more events.
Some
This year.
years we never get closed. Last year was a strange year, we got closed like 4 or 5 times.
In the fall
Because
or
of the
something,
rain,
yeah,
yeah,
lots of
it's
rain in the
terrible.
fall, yeah, yep. Other questions? Curiosities, yeah.
Has there been any tension between this new industry and the traditional lobster or fishing industry, and use of
Not here.
coves and the like?
There is in the state, but not here, and we're both commercial fishermen, so we already know everybody, so if they have a problem, they'll tell us, but.
Yeah.
Everybody knows this is gonna be the future, so.
The newspapers, I think, would like everyone to believe there's
Yeah,
a lot
right,
of tension,
right.
and there's just not. There are points of tension. I would say one of the more challenging pieces, and this is why we appreciate everybody coming out to hear about this, more tension is between the not in my backyard homeowners, waterfront homeowners who don't wanna have to accommodate and or look
Yeah,
at
that's the worst.
aquaculture. That's actually been more harmful to the folks that we know who are trying to start aquaculture projects. And it's hard because the word aquaculture can mean, a salmon farm with huge pens and lights and boats and industry that feels like, oh, I don't really want to look at that, and I can appreciate that. But aquaculture also includes, their kelp farm. You can't see the kelp farm. You see a few buoys, and then you see boats out there harvesting or seeding, and that's it. Like it's not a sort of large enterprise with light. And,
With the
Yeah.
leasing in Maine, one great thing is they don't take, in making the decision to give you a lease, they do not take into consideration not in my backyard.
Except that not in my backyard can incur a hearing, and that
Oh,
can put
yeah,
someone out
that's
of
true.
business. So that becomes challenging. So we like it when people come and get educated and ask questions, and then we also get to, people can come to us directly and say, hey, well, we don't like, X, Y, we don't like the color of your buoys, and we can say, well, that's what the DMR says we have to have. Like, it's a very regulated industry, and the DMR, I think, does a really good job of navigating between the commercial fishing and the aquaculture, but it's not without its challenges, for sure. But I do think I think the commercial fishing and the aquaculture is cooperating more than there is conflict, for sure.
Yep.
Just to mention real quick, there's like sort of a brewing conflict between clam diggers and aquaculture.
Yeah.
And oysters, the potential for oysters to crowd out the mud flats from the clams. This came up at the Fishermen's Association meeting.
Yep.
And so our local shellfish committee here on St. George, is trying to push for oyster farmers to use sterile seed so that there's no chance of it,
Seeding, yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Huh. That becomes an interesting
Because look at the
question.
Damascotta River, there's very
I
little
know.
planting left down there because of the
Right.
farms, but.
Right,
It's like kelp, they're gonna do that with kelp now, they're gonna
Well,
make
you
sterile
kinda have to
kelp for
wonder
that
about-
same reason.
yeah.
They're doing it right now, studying it.
And you have to kind of wonder too, about density. Yeah. No, there's a lot to it that, this is the first time oyster farming, like the last 50 years. It's really like, before that it was just oysters grew and there were locations and you harvested and then we have pollution. I mean, we kind of cooked our own meal there. We ate them all and we killed them all. But, so oyster farming in the scheme of things is relatively new, and then these guys will share like seaweed farming is even newer. So it's a lot of new. For sure.
How long have you been doing this now?
We really dabbled the first couple of years, but we got our first oysters in 2016.
Yeah.
Because years ago, Harry used to
Yeah,
start them down here and they would wrap them in wet Scott paper.
Yep.
Now we'll send them to Carolina. I think that's fascinating.
Yep.
Where they would grow faster.
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
there wasn't anything going on.
No, I know, and we didn't get them ever from Herring Gut, but yeah, that was pretty. Westgate oysters started with Herring Gut.
Did it?
As I understand it.
I didn't know that.
So a warming ocean will improve the conditions for growing oysters.
Yes, to a point.
Correct,
Yeah.
to a point, and then there will be a point where it goes past and
Is that because of dissolved oxygen when it gets hotter though, or?
Food
food,
They need food.
acidification, yeah.
and,
Yeah, how much biomass of oyster is out, can be supported?
I don't know that question.
That's an interesting question. I mean, they do a great job of helping clean the water, and the seaweed farming, they're finding the seaweed is a nice carbon sink, so they're creating environments where they're using the seaweed with shellfish to help the shellfish shells harden, because that's becoming a problem. So there are ways for it, presumably all to be sympathetic. It's just a question of how quickly any of us get to do enough of it.
We just have a tendency to exploit whatever resource is
Exactly.
available
Yes, we
right
do.
to the maximum.
Yeah.
Yes, we
you know,
do. But there's not yet a saturation of oyster growing.
Well, the licensing is so strict.
It's-
It's kind of too hard, I think, and they don't have enough employees, so they're all backed up. But they're doing a great job with what little they have. The other thing about water temperature is Maine oysters are soft the world over because of our cold water. So, and for raw,
Right.
and so that's interesting too, to see what happens. Because I wouldn't even want to eat a New Orleans oyster. No way. I'll cook it, but I'm not going to eat an 80-degree water oyster.
I have to skip out.
Yes.
They do, right?
All right, so
I have to skip out. I apologize. I double booked. But these guys are gonna take over from
we're
here.
going to do a
That's why I did all the
slideshow
talking.
on our kelp farm. The slideshow is basically about how and why we transition into growing kelp from being commercial fishermen. So,
Should I pass this to you guys?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
You guys probably know it better.
This is the clicker. How do you get it?
Well, or you can just arrow if you want.
So, I'm John Cotton with Sean Thomas. We both own Devil's Apron Sea Farm, which is a 4-acre farm just around the corner, but I'll let Sean start talking on do I go ahead here?
I think I got the power.
John, if you don't mind, just, if you could talk a little bit louder.
Sure.
Because, slightly hearing impaired.
We did talk quietly.
Thanks.
So John and I have both been commercial fishermen for a long time, and lobstering, you can see in 2021, we were on kind of a high. I mean, everyone had this pandemic money and they were spending it on seafood, some of them. And it was really good for us. And we didn't really we didn't think it was gonna decline so quickly. So you can see here it shows a significant drop, and then it got even worse. 2022 was actually very terrible. So moving on to ground fish, I mean, it's done the same thing. It's just progressively got worse. And the thing with fishing, I mean, we would bounce from one thing to another. So if you had a bad year lobstering, you could make it up ground fishing. Or if you had a bad year ground fishing and lobstering, maybe the shrimp would come through.
Yeah, all fishermen used to have 4 or 5 fisheries to be able to do that. Now it's one lobster.
Pretty much just lobstering. So last year, I mean, we had to catch our own bait because we just weren't making any money. So this is my boat on the left, and we started with gill nets, and it helped. It helped quite a bit. Maybe catch enough for the day or something. And then my neighbor actually, he spent the money, bought a seine, you can see it from the stern of the boat. And we started catching more and more, which helped us more and more. It was a lot of work.
How much is a tray of bait right now?
A tray of bait is roughly around $100. So
Those fish trays, you see the black rectangle, what is that, 200 pounds?
it's
50 traps?
It's about 100 pounds.
Yes.
Yeah, I take 2 barrels on average a day just to go fishing and the gear I've got to get through. So you can see we're allowed 17 barrels is what we were allowed at the end. But the fish kind of dried up around here. So, I mean, we were going all the way to Stonington, and it's like a 3-hour trip. So it's a lot of fuel and a lot of expenses. But I figured out at the end of the year, I saved myself around $15,000 to $20,000 by catching my own bait. I had absolutely no life, you know, during the summer, but it's what we had to do. So we're hoping that lobstering will make a, you know, little comeback. But, and this is the shrimp. I mean, we used to really rely on the shrimp, and the shrimp are gone now.
They look delicious.
Dying
Dying to have them
so
again.
good. I know.
Canada has a booming industry in shrimp.
And we think a lot of that's warming water temperatures. And, you know, there was a study done recently. They think that because of the warming temperatures, the squid are staying around longer and possibly eating shrimp.
They're doing the same to herring. The squid are pushing the herring out because they stay longer and come earlier because of the warmer water.
And also, you know, we had a bit of a problem with overfishing, and it was an open fishery, so a lot of guys got into it. They saw the money there. The state couldn't keep up with the landings reportings, so they think that they could have possibly killed like 2 categories of shrimp, 2 class years, all at once, you know, without anyone even knowing it happened. And then it happened. We have to deal with the aftermath. That currently is no shrimp at all, which is a bummer.
How long are they keeping the monitoring on the shrimp?
Well, they don't know. They do test tows. A
Forever.
couple guys in Port Clyde were involved in that. And they were catching a lot of shrimp around Pemaquid a couple years ago. But the shrimp that are around here, I mean, you see them come up on the rail, you know, they get caught in the mud, or you can see them on the rail of the boat when you're hauling your trap. So we know that there still are some around, but not enough to be able to harvest.
Yeah.
So, this is tuna fishing, same thing. Last spring, John and I actually had the opportunity to go down. I don't know if any of you watched that show, Wicked Tuna. We went down on the right. That's the pinwheel, is the boat. And John and I took that back from Wanchese, North Carolina, and we loaded up on bluefin tuna. I think we were the first boat to land
On the East Coast to catch
Broad
them,
Bay.
160 miles offshore. But that fishery has been ruined by regulations. And you hear a lot about bluefin tuna being endangered. That's Pacific bluefin. The Atlantic bluefin is really hugely healthy. But what they've done to the fishery is they've turned it into a sport fishery, so you only allow one fish a day. And there's so many fishermen, there's so many fish come in and flood the market, so the fish aren't worth anything. And you only allowed one. Back in 2010 to 2016, you allowed 5 a day. That's my boat with those 5 fish. And we go to George's Bank, 150 miles offshore, and catch 5 30 times a year. We make really good money. But now you can't do that anymore. So that's basically, I do that for fun now. I'll go catch one in my freezer, and then, but that's another fishery down too.
Yeah, another one gone. And you know, when you have an open fishery like that, a lot of guys get in, they don't know how to handle the fish.
Yeah.
I mean, John did this for years. And,
The permits are open,
yeah.
so anybody can get a permit.
And John's fish would be top quality, and a lot of these guys, they don't know how to bleed it out, they don't know how to take care of it. So when they're landing these fish,
Poor quality. Yeah.
it's very poor quality, so the market is flooded with, you know, just bad quality fish. And they haven't figured out a way to regulate that yet, so we're hoping that changes. That's another pictures from the trip.
What size of it?
God.
Yeah, we had some,
That's like
good-
400 pounds.
Wow.
So Tyler, the kid from the show, we were traveling up the coast and fishing with him. We were very proud of ourselves because we caught more fish than he did. You know, and he's on the show, so we were kind of back again once on this big high of 2021, and moving into 2022, and then we got paid $10 a pound for the red meat, and we had one fish that went to Chicago, I believe,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that had some fat content, and we got 16.
Yeah.
But during the summer of 2022, the average price was maybe $2.
Yeah, $2 a pound.
Roughly. So that's a huge, you're not even covering fuel. So, this talks more about, you know, the free fall, the tuna fishing. It's just very sad thing. So we decided to diversify. John started a farm a few years ago and had a few problems and wanted to sit back a couple of years. So we teamed up and found, you know, some different ways to do it, and we started Devil's Apron. So Devil's Apron, by the way, we're not
That's what we
like
used to call those big
yeah.
sweet.
Yeah, it's another name for the sugar kelp, which
Yeah.
is what we're growing. So we're not like devil worshippers. There's nothing evil in that. Just another name. That's John's daughter. That was from the first year when John
Yeah, I
started.
dried a whole bunch. That's what I was making that greenhouse for in the movie, was to dry all the kelp to sell. I sold it fresh too. It's amazing stuff. It's so delicious.
So now drying it, you get like a tenth of.
Yeah, it's 10 pounds for 1 pound, but it's like, it's very, it can be $60 a pound dry. But it's, you know, you gotta dry a lot of kelp. The big market for us is, well, we should go through these slides and we'll explain all that.
So we were so late to the game this year. We didn't get some of the gear until roughly December. Most people set out or would have already been set out.
Yeah, November usually.
By the time we came up with a plan. So we were very late. So we had to find a way to store all the seed. It'd be the same thing as with this right here. So they're PVC. So that sits into each one of these little columns, bait spikes I've got. You know, we have all the gear to build traps and stuff like that. So we came up with a way to store it. We were actually using the pound where John has his oysters as kind of a storage facility until we could get
Yeah,
everything
that's
built and set up. Yep, so that's in the pound right there, I believe. That's one of the cages. I think that cage holds like 34 spools. Each spool is 20 inches high, and it holds 300
feet of seed string. We'll explain that.
Yeah, just like that right there, what you're looking at. And that's another picture. That's on the boat. So this made it easily transportable for us to, you're still getting the sunlight and the flow through. So the kelp is actually just growing in the pound as we get ready. You know, we're all set now. We're nearly all set out. We have a couple more feet to set out. But, getting closer all the time. That's what it looks like. That was on John's boat. You know, we transfer it from the pound with a skiff and put it in an exact with water, and they say, what, 32 hours you can keep it?
Yeah, it has to be kept wet. You can, when we seed out, it can be out for a couple hours, but
Yeah.
the faster you get it back in the water, better. And that turns into, 12-foot long kelp on the ropes. On these saddles, this is what we're using now.
Yeah, this is a different way of doing kelp. A lot of guys, they're using almost a grid pattern. So you've got a bunch of moorings, and with the moorings, it's one-to-one scope. So you've got a straight line coming up, straight line, and then your grid pattern is in the center. Well, if you think about that, there's really no way to tension the system. So you get a big storm and all the weight and everything else. The sites wanted to, and did in a lot of situations, they would collapse into themselves. So by finding this design, we thought it was brilliant because we can tension. You can see here, we've got 200-pound anchors. I'll show you a picture of the anchors in a second. And this is a deadeye, which is basically an underwater tensioning system. So we can tension 15 feet on both sides. And on the back of these anchors, we have a line that comes up with a buoy. So we can tie the buoy up to the back of the boat, and we can maneuver where we have this. We can reposition and tighten the system that way as well. So this was a very appealing system, and you're allowed to, or it allows you to have more kelp lines in a smaller area. So by doing it this way, we have 5 lines growing on the system. And so our grow lines inside here are 800 feet in total distance, and these are 200 feet apiece. And then we have a spreader bar, we'll show you a picture in a second, with a buoy that just keeps it at the optimal growing depth, which is, we found anywhere from 6 to 7 feet. We've tried,
Yeah, we got a buoy, those red things are buoys.
Yep,
And
the
there's a metal spreader bar that's, the ropes are attached to, and the ropes are made so that it hangs 7 feet under the surface all the farm, so boats can go over it. So.
Yeah, I'll show you.
That-
That's more of an overhead view. So this is
Yeah,
kind of what it looks
yeah.
like from the side. So we got the anchors to the underwater, well, the dead eyes, the tensioners, and that's kind of what it would look like from a side view.
What kind of water depth can this work?
Well, we're basically, so on the west side, we're at, well, it shows right there, 52 to 54 feet is basically on the west side. The east side is more like 35 to 42. And that's what, we've got the anchors on the 3-to-1 scope, so you have a lot of tension, a lot of pull. I'll show you the anchors.
That's what it looks like right now with the kelp just starting to grow.
Yeah.
And later on, there'll be like 10 to 15 feet long kelp hanging off those ropes. And those
So
anchors.
these are what the anchors look like. They call them embedment anchors, and they're kind of specially designed for a system like this. I mean, if you had a sailboat, you really wouldn't need an anchor like this. You could
Yeah,
have
they're like this big, they're huge.
massive,
200 pounds.
very hard.
The shovel, see the 2 points on the end, that will go right into the mud. And when it's finally firmly set, only this much will be sticking out of the mud. So you've got that much holding.
Yeah.
And then when you want to remove them, we have a rope tied here with a buoy. So you just pull it backwards out of the mud. And also, like you were saying, tightening the system. You can either retrieve it with that or tighten the system.
Right. And they do stick in. We're gonna send a diver down after we get everything in position, just to make sure, because we don't know what's going on down there. The chain could be wrapped around 15 times. We have no idea, so.
Who's making those anchors?
That's the company right there.
Tend
Tend
Ocean,
Ocean.
it's a guy in Massachusetts, great guy, Cliff Gowdy.
He's a naval engineer, marine architect, so
Brilliant,
he
man.
knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
Before, when I did this first year, we just made it up. And we had some great success, we had some great failure too, because we didn't have any of this stuff. We made cement moorings, and they aren't as heavy in the water as these. They don't have the holding power. So my farm actually moved and collapsed my whole farm. But
back to what we're saying at the beginning, one-to-one scope, I mean, there's really no way to tension
Yeah.
unless you took the one-to-one scope and then anchored off outside of it, but then you're outside of your lease. So it's a tricky thing. But this made everything, simplified it, and it really made sense. And so that's what the dead eyes look like. And we found this rope that's was really great for this application. It was regatta rope, regatta light, and it doesn't kink. It's just it works great. And actually, the guy that built it was fascinated with this rope because they were using a 3-strand before, and they had a lot of problems with biofoul, and it's so rigid. Where this stuff, I mean, this is yachty stuff. This isn't something that a commercial fisherman like we are. You'd never dream of even buying something.
Yes, it's
Let
an
alone
underwater block and tackle, because here's the anchor, and that's the upper part of the farm, so when we wanna tighten it or loosen it, we just pull it, and it come together, or we 15 feet, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and these are made out of nylon, so they're really slippery, so nothing ever binds up.
we had really good luck. We've actually done all the designs by using that 3-strand. They have to take their boat up and position perfectly. You throw a grapple, you bring it up, and then you tension with your pot hauler or some other kind of device to haul it and tighten it. Well, with this crazy regatta rope, we're able to do it in the skiff, you know, just out there pulling by hand, and it's brilliant. I mean, we couldn't believe it actually worked. So that's what we've been doing for tensioning. This was something we picked up at the Mariculture conference in Juneau that we attended. Shows a lot about how the kelp is a carbon trap, and we're slowing down the acidification of the water. I can't really read.
Yeah, read it, sorry.
But basically, we can tell you that we're involved in this program. So John and I went out and we took samples on what we had set out in December 30th.
Yeah, they gave us an app, and they sent us, this company working with an app on our phone, it's called Greenwave, and once a month, we go out and we put tape on a 1-foot section in 3 parts of the farm, we take a picture of it, and we weigh it, and we have a scale. And you put it all in this app, and it automatically figures out how much carbon you removed, how much nitrogen you removed, how many pounds you have at that moment.
Right.
It's amazing. Eventually, we're gonna be getting paid not only to sell the kelp, but for carbon, the same, carbon credits.
Hopefully carbon credits.
Yeah.
Once it's approved.
Yeah.
That will be.
But this Greenwave company started to help guys like us, and they have a website with all the videos, how to do it all, and they're a nonprofit, and they're solely there to help us. It's really great.
I've been a huge help. And so the results from the 1-foot pieces, it says currently we have taken
50 pounds of carbon out of the ocean, 20 pounds of nitrogen.
20 pounds of nitrogen. So far, the kelp hasn't even really grown.
It's about like this right
We
now.
can show you a picture on our phone. We don't have it on, we kind of forgot that. But that's exciting, and now is when the growth, the days are longer, there's more sunlight, and there's, a lot of current right now. So this is the real growing season for the kelp.
Yeah.
So it should take off. They say it can grow up to 2-3 inches a day
Yeah,
sometimes.
it's amazing. Yeah, like, we'll go out, we haven't been out there for a week, we'll go out there and be another 4 inches or so.
Yeah,
From
we-
now until June, it grows like crazy.
It's just, we get so excited just to go out and see the growth in different spots. I mean, it's just, we're kind of nerds when it comes to that stuff.
How long will it be before you harvest it?
June.
No, lengthwise.
Should be 6 to 10 feet.
We're hoping.
We should get 5 pounds per foot minimum. And when I had my first farm, I had 100,000 pounds, but it got destroyed, a lot of it, but it grew really well. It grows, the benefits where we are, because we're at the mouth of the St. George River outside, and we get a lot of current, which the kelp gets all the nutrients, but the drawback to that is it can damage it as well, move the farm around. Because a lot of kelp farms are up inside coves where they're just safer. We're out in the middle there, and it has to be really done right, or it happened to me. What happened to me is one of my moorings, I inflated the polyball up big, so I thought that was a really cool idea. But that was the dumbest thing you ever do, because when the storm came, it had more lift. And it moved, it only moved one more, and I had 12. And I had 16,000 feet of kelp seed. And it moved the whole, one more and moved my whole farm in, and it sunk.
And then a boat.
Yeah, then it boat ran out. Then it floats. Kelp, when it gets really big, it floats, so you have to put weights on it. But in the beginning, you have to have buoys on it to keep it out in the sunlight. So it's pretty complicated, but, and a lot of guys, they start in November, where you really don't see any growth until, like we said, so we've started, this is very late to see, but I did it before, and I did just as well as guys who set in October. My farm had the same amount of poundage, so we're not too worried about that yet.
No. Kind of take what we can get this year. Still learning the process and everything, but it's definitely exciting. And every time we go out there, we find some other mistake we've made, or some other hiccup along the way. There's a lot of pitfalls. We went out, luckily we had a big spool of twine. We were able to twine back all this stuff. We had one seed line that came off the grow line, and it had connected to another line, which connected to another line, and the holdfast had already secured it. So we were thinking, how in the heck did this ever happen?
We didn't explain how we do the seed.
Yeah, we don't have any pictures of that. So when we seed out, we'll take these PVC pieces, and the grow line will go inside of it. So we'll take an end of the seed line and splice it in, and then pull this back over. And as you pull it over the grow line, it just unseeds, and
The string winds right around the rope.
and it winds
It's
perfect.
really hard. It's a pain in the butt. You gotta come up with a new way.
Yeah, we could show you pictures, but we don't have one with us. We could show you, later if you have any questions. But yeah, it's been a huge learning curve, and we're trying something different than, I think there's 2 farmers in Maine doing the gear the same way.
Yeah, with this type of gear, mostly everybody does the 1-to-1 with the cement moorings. That's the old, there's actually a book on how to do kelp, but it's really outdated. And that's what mostly everybody's using now.
The Kelp encyclopedia.
Yeah, and that is a good way, but it's kind of primitive. This is a much more modern way.
In a lot of farms, some of them you can walk out to. There are people growing kelp, and they're tending it with waders. You won't get the same growth, but you will get some growth out of it. So we're kind of crazy by doing it. I don't know,
Yeah, we have,
It's good to be crazy.
yeah.
Well, yeah.
We have 20,000 feet, we will have 20,000 feet out there, and that should be 100,000 pounds. But maybe not this year, because we might have some problems, but we'll see.
It's been exciting. So, and that's the reason we did it, is something diversifying, trying to find some other source of income. And the way John and I look at it too is we've been taking from the ocean all our lives, trying to make an income, and this is actually a way to, not to sound like a cheese ball, but to give back a little bit, and if we can help slow the process of acidification and still maybe make some money, then hopefully.
Well, again, we got a contract with this company. They're gonna pay us $1.30 a wet pound, which is a big price. And now it's funny, because when kelp farms first started 8-10 years ago, everybody blanched it, they cook it, and then they freeze it, and then they sell it that way in big batches to restaurants, to cruise ships, bakeries. They put the powder into bread or smoothies. And now they've come to find out the best way to do it is they dry it and turn it into a powder, and then it can be used in many, many different ways. And and the main thing they figured out is by blanching it and freezing it, you're putting more carbon back in than you took out. So they finally figured out that was a little dumb.
Yeah.
This company is really, Greenway is a fascinating group of people. And it's started by this guy named, he's our hero, Bren Smith. And if you want to read or hear a good, go listen to an audible. It's called Eat Like a Fish. It's amazing. This guy's amazing. It's so, and anybody who reads it, 80 years old, 16 years old loves it. It's the guy. He started this company. He wants the world to be filled with regenerative ocean farms, where finfish farms, a lot of them pollute and do damage to the environment. Shellfish and oysters and it's all the shellfish and oyster farms, they help.
Right,
And, instead of ruining the ocean, it helps the ocean, so.
definitely.
What's the name of the book again?
Eat Like a Fish. You get it on Audible. You gotta hear it on, because the author reads it, and he's so great, him reading it. He's real,
He's very-
Renaissance man.
Yeah,
He
he's
grew up in
there.
Newfoundland, and now he's a big deal in Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York. He's got a TED Talk too, called, Brent Smith's his name, look that up, TED Talk. It's really good.
What do the oysters eat?
Plankton, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, plankton, yeah.
So can you feed them?
Yeah, you could, but it would be very hard. You could have them in a holding tank. That's what Mook does. They grow their own, well, so when they raise spat, they have to feed them. So they have a whole section in the nursery that grows algae. They have these huge tubes of algae, it's pretty cool. But that's interesting. Because at Mook Sea Farms, he has a closed system, so they don't go in the ocean, they're in the tank, and he feeds them. But we don't, that's millions and millions of dollars.
Are those as good as yours?
No oyster farmer's gonna say yes to that question. You always love your own the best.
Of course.
So are the processors keeping up with the growth of the farmers?
Kelp, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great question, because we just got back from Alaska, and they can grow kelp like nothing, but their infrastructure is nothing, because Alaska.
Yeah.
So they have huge kelp farms that can't sell it.
Yeah.
But their work, like the federal government just gave Alaska $49 million to figure that question out, so I think they're gonna figure out.
Good.
Maine right now harvests more kelp than any other place, but they're gonna catch up. And they grow bull kelp, which we can't, because it's not native. And bull kelp grows way faster, way bigger. We'd love to grow bull kelp.
Yeah, just the whole fest, the root, the stipe, I mean, it looks like a whip, I mean, this
Yeah.
thing is, it's crazy. And I think that gets up to 20-something feet.
Yeah.
So,
Well, they sell, they make like kelp pickles out of the stipe, and they're able to use the stipe as well.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
really cool.
there was a company, called Barnacle
Yeah.
Seafood, and they were doing a lot of, they were at the conference.
Yeah,
They had a lot of really neat stuff.
they have
Yeah.
some cool products.
It's really good. And they're using it for compost too, they buy it, so they'll buy it from us at a lower price,
Mm-hmm.
and that will be used for compost, the stipe and the whole fast.
Oh.
Yeah. Or they have grades also for the kelp too, if you A, B, C grade, but out here, since it's so deep, we never touch the bottom.
Right.
You touch the bottom, you get, organism will grow on
Yeah.
kelp, and it won't be worth as much money,
Mhm.
but we don't have that problem. But there is a new problem happening in the ocean, and it's this brown algae that everybody's talking about. It's been here forever, but now, and it's because of water warming,
Right.
it's just growing out of control. I don't know, you see that brown stuff? I don't see it out in Deep Cove there, but like in the Lobster Pound, anywhere where you don't have as much current. It's the stuff that grows on your ropes.
I get that fine green stuff, that's like
Yeah.
real fine, gets into everything, that's
Yeah.
a real pain.
Then there's this other stick figure creature, have you seen that growing?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like a alien.
yeah, it looks like a,
Yeah, like billions of those.
I've
A
got it.
skeleton shrimp?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what it is, yeah.
yes, I've got it on the hull of my boat right now.
They do look like aliens.
It's
yeah.
so bizarre to look at.
But it is gonna
Very
be
weird.
interesting to see what happens to the water warming, because like Tony was saying, the lobster pound we used to freeze solid, and the guys, when they had lobster in there, used to have to work every day with a skiff to break the ice. Well, we used to have to run skiffs to our boats in the harbor
Yeah,
for a month of the winter to break the ice. And that did happen a few years ago, it froze at Friendship Harbor bad, but that seems to be an anomaly.
yeah, it froze, Port Clyde froze, but it was only for a couple days, they were froze for months.
Yeah, and
They just don't have a flow that goes in like Port Clyde
our
does.
lobster pound hasn't frozen, it froze a little bit this year, but it hasn't frozen in like 10 years, and that's just crazy.
Mm.
So I don't know what's gonna, and it's funny, I don't really, as a fisherman, I can't really tell you, I know the water's warmer, but not really, but you know, because it isn't on, it's like, it is warmer in the winter, like it's rarely goes below 40 offshore now, where it used to go 30 degrees sometimes offshore.
Mm.
But I think this warm water on the bottom is what it is, that's why the lobsters are offshore, I don't know, it's just,
No, it's, what did they say, 2021, you probably know this. I think 2021 or 2020 was the
Yeah, I
highest
think
temperature.
2021 was the hottest.
Yeah, ever recorded.
And you're not really noticing it all at once because it's only going up, you know, it's not like it's going up a degree every year, it's small, you know, like a half a degree, or I'm not sure of the exact number, it's little and little and little, but it's very fast.
Yeah.
For, you know, in the history of oceans, this is very fast.
The warmest,
And the Gulf of Maine is the warmest.
It's the warmest, yeah.
warming the fastest.
Warming the fastest
Yeah.
of any body of
Which is
water.
pretty scary. And lobstering, you know, it's fine now, it's, the warm water's helping it, but, you know, look at southern New England.
Right.
They're, you know, from Massachusetts up, it's good, below that, it's terrible.
And you can see on, well, you can't see, but I can see. You know, with the acidification in the water, it's saying that, you know, is the shells for the crabs and other species, it becomes thinner after a while. So that makes them more susceptible to different diseases, like shell disease. And that's what they had a big problem with down south.
Down south, yeah. Another thing
So-
about kelp they're doing, experimenting with, is they're actually growing it and dragging it out to sea as a carbon sink. There's this guy in Portland doing this right now.
Yeah.
That's something, that'd be pretty cool to be able to do.
Yeah.
You know, you'd have to
It would
harvest
save
it,
me
you drag
harvesting.
it out and dump it.
Yeah. Sounds good to me.
Anybody have any particular questions?
I have a question that's just pedestrian, but are you concerned about recreational boat traffic with the Kelp?
Yes.
I mean, it seems, I don't fully understand, I understand you said the depth of the top lines,
7 feet.
but there are obviously gonna be times when that isn't the case.
We've had issues with it, but
Yeah.
it's so far, people stay away from it just because it looks intimidating.
Yeah, a lot of people know it's there now. And you know, the good thing for us is when we're growing it, it's from November till June. So there's not a lot of,
Yeah,
you know, recreational fishing.
there's no recreational boats out there.
There's not
And then do
many,
you
no.
then collect all of the gear? with
Yes.
Harness, and then it goes back out next December or
Next
October?
November, yeah.
Yeah, we'll remove everything.
Okay.
And we did that primarily because, like Sean was saying, lobstermen now have to get all their own bait, so there's a massive influx of pogie fishermen.
Right,
And if we had that stuff,
that was one of my,
if we left it, even if we put it on the bottom, they could get snagged with it. 'Cause some
Okay.
guys don't wanna put it on the bottom, but one of the main reasons we like this new equipment is it's easy to remove. We put it all on the shore, it's easy to put back in.
okay.
That's a very good point. So,
Yeah, I was thinking about the hoagie fishermen in September, October, and that would just be,
Yeah, we can't.
we'd be in the way. We're trying to get along with it. Cause we're on the other side too, you know, we do the pogie
Right.
fishing.
We really picked that
Do the
spot.
lobstering, so.
We really picked that spot too, because nobody lobsters there.
Yeah, it's kind of a dead zone. There's lobsters there for 2 weeks in the summer, and that's it. That is absolutely it. It's the ocean floor is a soupy clay mud, and that's why these anchors are working so well for us, is because they really dig in. If we had sand or a gravelly mix, which we do have gravel on one side, but it's still able for those embedment anchors to really catch. But every site is so different, you know, every site. So a site in a couple hundred, 300 feet, Scott's site?
Yeah.
He's a little bit more shallow, and he's having trouble with snails, and, you know, we're not having that trouble yet, but, you know, we could.
We're much deeper though,
By being a little deeper, it just creates, everyone has their own problems in their own site, and it varies 100 feet away, so you just kind of roll the dice, hope for the best.
Is the November to June timeline a regulatory requirement? Is it just a financial consideration for you because it won't grow between June and November?
Right.
Or is it commercial citizenship toward other fisheries
Well,
like lobster?
It's some of all of that.
Yes.
But mainly the growth. It's very poor quality in the hot water. It grows
We get a
much
lot of
better.
biofoul that creates on.
It grows better in the colder water, to a certain extent. Like, I think up to 50 degrees, it starts degrading around 50 degrees.
Yeah.
And then you get a bleached out kelp, where right now it's a dark brown, robust color, and there's no shredded leaves on the bottom. It looks great, but you get in the warm, then you start getting problems.
So
other
it,
critters eat kelp?
say again?
Do other critters eat kelp?
Not that we've seen so far, I mean,
I know, I always thought ducks would be doing it.
Yeah.
They don't.
we haven't had any trouble. I've got friends in Alaska that grow kelp as well, and they don't have any trouble either. They were kind of worried. They have a wild set. They're not even this complicated stuff. It just grows on its own, and they have multi-species. They'll have bull kelp on one section, and then 20 feet away they've got dulse growing up, and 30 feet away they've got sugar kelp, and they didn't seed any of that. It's just growing naturally. So. But back to our original thing, that they don't have the infrastructure, so they're drying it. They don't really. That's where Maine is very lucky in regards to that, because we have a way to. We have the infrastructure here currently.
Yeah, we're so close to New York and Boston.
Yeah.
It's just great.
So one thing that they were trying, we learned at this mariculture conference, is they're taking, the fishery is doing the same thing on the West Coast. There's a lot of overfishing, there's a lot of fisheries being closed all the time. So what they're doing is they're taking these big salmon processors, and they're thinking about bringing these salmon processors to the farms, and actually, instead of processing fish, they're processing the kelp. So now you have a way to navigate that problem where there are no roads, and you're not gonna throw it on the plane, so you could, I guess.
Yeah, it wouldn't be cost effective to do that.
Not at all.
No.
Things are already expensive enough in Alaska.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Extremely. This is true.
Any other questions? Well, I just had one last one, for both of you, and John, since you're representing two companies, what's the biggest challenge for you all going forward?
Leasing from the state, the regulations.
Yeah.
And all they need is more money. If they could hire more people to pay them better. Because what happens is, you'll be getting good rapport with the people who work there, and you gotta talk to them on the phone. Because when you do an application, it's like a 5-page thing, you almost need a lawyer to help you figure out. And it's all these, everything has to be really set in stone of how you're doing it, why, what. And you have questions, and then these people will quit and go into the private sector and get better paying jobs, so it's just a revolving door up in Augusta. They need to have, the Department of Agriculture needs to be a separate thing.
Right.
It's hooked in with the DMR, Division of Marine Resources right now. It needs to be its own building, its own, but that takes a lot of money.
Right. And I asked that question because that's what we hear in other programs we've had. It's not like the folks at the state are, trying to be.
No.
No, it's just that they're overwhelmed and
Overwhelmed.
there's not enough staff.
Well,
Everything's so new as well.
Here's an example. My wife usually get an email answer within a day. She emailed 3 different people up there and hasn't heard for a month. So that's kind of scary. Because we have an application in right now and we haven't heard back. We're supposed to hear back from, we already went through one stage. What happens, you send it in, they send it back with all the things you did wrong. Then you fix them, and that goes back and forth depending on how smart you are. So we did the second one, we haven't heard from them, we're supposed to hear from them in 30 days, it's been almost 60 days now.
Yeah.
And I keep looking at my emails, did I miss it?
Right, well, I'm checking my spam folder.
Yeah, exactly.
It's nerve-wracking.
It's the same for me. I submitted an application in January, and I haven't even received that first letter with all the errors yet. So
Well,
it's
you know,
March, so.
It seemed like
Don't
something
feel bad.
happened, something really bad happened around Christmas, because they were doing great before then. And then and that Cheyenne, did you ever talk to Cheyenne? She worked there, she was great,
Yeah,
she quit.
probably should.
Yeah, she quit.
Yeah.
But it's like, really great people, and they're all like graduates of UMaine. UMaine has unbelievable agriculture courses, so there's a great, body of people they can draw on. But like I said, they'll work there for a year, then they'll get a better job.
Maybe they should work at the university.
Yeah, well, one of my friends, Scott Lord, his sister worked. She worked for Pemaquid, I think.
Bigelow was.
Yeah, well, now she's working for a Mexican company that's growing striped bass. The first fish farm where they're putting in less food and getting more. As before, you had to put in like 20 pounds of bait fish to 1 pound of fish to feed people. Now they've reversed it. That's where she's working. So
Did they talk about oysters in that Alaska conference?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Any interesting,
They do it totally different. They do them in these big, big cages, metal, right?
That must look like a bread basket.
It's tall, it's
Genius.
stacked. They're
They're all
stacked.
stacked up.
And I was wondering why they do it that way, and this is really fascinating. So the water temp during the summer cools down because the glaciers melt. So they put them down. Unlike us, we want them on the top because that's warmer water. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Because Sean's best buddy out there, he's got one of the biggest oyster farms in the United States. He did this hatchery here.
oh,
Greg and Weatherly Bay.
oh, okay.
Look
They're
up,
Alaskan shellfish company.
Alaskan shellfish, it's on Instagram. It's got a long dash in it, I'll show it to you. But anyways, they're fascinating.
Yeah.
They're like huge pioneers. But they had a huge farm up the river. They had a bunch of oysters there.
Mhm.
And then they got Vibrio in the hatchery and that killed them. So Vibrio is a bad disease and somehow it got in the hatchery and that you have to shut everything down. We have to take a test every year. If you grow shellfish, state mandates you take a Vibrio test every year so you know about Vibrio is something that grows naturally on shellfish, even on lobsters. Well, you cook lobsters, so you don't have to worry about it. I'll shut up, I'll go on forever.
I would like to thank you all very much for coming today.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much.
Herringborough Coastal Science Center is, we have a whole slew of upcoming programs. I'd like to just mention two of them. One is, we have an online auction starting on March 26th and running for April 2nd. Lots of really cool stuff that's going to be available to bid on, and you can go on every day and bid if you like. And then the other one is we have our March Learn, Discover, Grow series that's coming on March 28th, featuring Maine's Big Night. And those of you who are familiar, up and down throughout the state of Maine, but along the coast, are some prime times and opportunities to see the amphibians crossing roads. And Big Night is just the right temperature, just the right rain, and the amphibians start crossing the roads to the areas where they want to mate and reproduce. And so we're hosting an introduction with Greg LeClaire, who's the coordinator for Maine's Big Night. And then later in April, we're actually hosting a Big Night with George's River Land Trust. You're welcome to participate. And your support is always appreciated. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.